President Ghani's visited and the state of Afghan-U.S. relations. We're joined by Nick Burns. He's a former Undersecretary at the U.S. State Department. He's currently a professor of the practice of diplomacy and international politics at Harvard University, and that's where we find him. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. First, I'd like to get your reaction to the Obama administration's decision to maintain current U.S. troop levels in Afghanistan. Would you say the U.S. president is going back on his promises, and what's to say that this doesn't change again in the future?
No, I think the president made the right decision today. We have to look at operations on the ground. The Taliban is obviously resurgent. The fighting season, traditionally as the snows melt, will be in the spring and summer of this year. The Afghan government that's just taken power of President Ashraf Ghani has been a very impressive government. They've really tried very hard to speed up reforms and to use the assistance they're getting from the international community in a much more positive way. And it's a government in Kabul that's much more open to points of view from around the world. So I think all those combine to convince the United States that we need to stay the course here. We've been in Afghanistan, as you well know, since October of 2001, 13 years. We've made an enormous national effort there. We're supported by the United Nations, by Security Council resolutions. Most countries in the world, I think, want to see the United States and its NATO allies stay as long as we can to stabilize that government.
As you mentioned, it has been a long time. So what do you think regular Afghans want? What do regular Americans want? Do you think that there is an appetite for a continued military presence?
Well, I would distinguish the situation in Afghanistan from the much more controversial situation in Iraq. While we've had very tough years in Afghanistan, remember why we're there, because Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda attacked us on September 11th, 2001 from Afghanistan. We had to go in to fight al-Qaeda as well as the Taliban, and that terrorist threat still remains to the Afghan authorities as well as to the U.S. and others, and so you've got to deal with it. Secondly, I think it's important to look back at American history. We still have an American military presence in Germany that began, of course, in the Second World War. We still have an American military presence in Japan. They're both treaty allies of the United States. The Afghan government is a friend of the United States. This particular new government has been an impressive new friend. And I think it's in the interest of certainly India, as well as many other neighboring countries, I would include China in this, to see stability in Afghanistan and not to see a radical terrorist group like the Taliban prevail. And so I certainly believe that the president is right to do what he's doing, and I hope that the U.S. will continue to abide by its commitments there.
Well, I do want to ask you about this new relationship between Barack Obama and Ashraf Ghani, who recently took power there. It seemed like there was some tension with the former government in Afghanistan. So what do you make? Are you optimistic about what you've seen so far, this interaction between the two?
Well, I am, and I think that I think people all over the world, leaders, have been impressed by Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, the two leaders in the new government. They're focusing on trying to reduce corruption. They want to be much more efficient in the way that they use a declining resource base, assistance, economic assistance from overseas. And they certainly understand that they need to have further training of the Afghan army in order to be able to repel the Taliban. You haven't seen from President Ashraf Ghani some of the biting criticism that Hamid Karzai, the prior president, engaged in when there were incidents in Afghanistan, the criticism of the West and of the United States in particular. And I think this is very much welcome in the NATO alliance and particularly in the United States.